Welcome everyone. In today's short discussion, I'm going to talk about Azure update. I will focus on retirement announcements in the month of October 2022 till today, that is 11th of October 2022. I picked up this information from Azure blog, especially the announcement section, and we can filter it out for retirements and see all of them. What I essentially wanted to do is that walk you through some of the key important announcement which has happened. Now, it is important for you to take a strategy of anything which you are using is going to get out of support. You have got good amount of time available for most of the announcements, but be ready for the changes. Number one, if you have written Azure function and deployed using Node 12 runtime, then it's going to get deprecated by 13th of December 2022. So it is pretty soon, end of this year, you have to move out of Node 12 and migrate your code into modern Node, that is Node 14. The second thing is we'll talk about the Integration Services Environment, or ISE, which is going to get retired by 31st of August 2024. You still have a little less than 2 years time to, and then the suggested option is to transition it to Logic Apps Standard. So we'll not no more have the ISE in the context of integration scenario. For the Azure Badge, the certificate feature will be retired on 29th of February 2024. That means then you have to use Azure Key Vault for certificate related activity. So you still have 2 more years, a little less than 2 more years, 1.5 years or so, to make those changes. So if you are using Azure Batch, then move your certificates to Azure Key Vault. If you have developed an application using .NET Core 3.1 and deployed it into Azure Static Web Apps, then the end date of .NET Core 3.1 runtime support in Azure Static Web Apps is 3rd of December 2022. That means essentially after that, you will not be able to run your application. DSC, or desired state configuration, which is a VM extension for Linux. After you create a VM, it'll run a script to configure certain things inside the virtual machine, and the Azure Automation DSC support for Linux will be retired on 30th of September 2023. So you have 1 more year. If you have done this activity as part of your automation and deployment, you need to move it out of the DSC. And the blog basically talks about which what is the option you have here in terms of creating it. So I'll share the slide in my GitHub, and if you happen to read the slide or go to the blog announcement, it talks about things like what is needed for you in terms of migration strategy, um, what feature you need to use for auto manage, etc. And if there is any specific guideline or documentation on how to do things required, will be available over here as well. So these are all well documented, available in the Azure documentation site. There is an action required for SAP monitoring. If you have used SAP monitoring for Azure, that is the classic solution. It will be over by 31st of March 2023. So after that, it will not be supported. So the VM Insight, Azure Monitor for VM Insight, will be retired by 30th September 2024. It is tightly coupled with the feature called Service Map. Because Service Map is also going to be retired, you will not have support for VM Insights Um, um, like you will not have support for that and need to move it to the Azure Monitor for VM Insights, right? So that's the strategy. So you can go here and see the service map dependency if you have used any and take necessary action of creating the Azure Monitor for VM Insights if you need to do that or use this feature in case you are using. ASC, Azure Classic ASR or Azure Classic Resource Provider, will be retired on 31st August. So all the new thing which we use ARM is a plane on top of Azure, which allows us to communicate with the control plane via Azure Resource Manager. All the PowerShell, CLI, REST API you use uses that. Earlier, it used to be Azure Classic Resource Provider, where everything was clubbed together and gets to get created now. Everything individual resources you can create individually and destroy them individually are now the way forward. But we have been supporting that due to legacy application and infrastructure deployment, but it will be having its end date on 31st August 2024. If you're using basic SKU for public IP address, you need to move it to standard SKU because the basic SKU will be out of support from 30th of September 2025. That's the end date for basic SKU for public IP address if you have any. So that's all from my side from the Azure update management perspective. I wanted to focus on the retirement part of it, but I wanted to also give some options by which you can enable this update announcement for yourself. So if you're using Outlook, you can configure the RSS feed available in this link. If you click on that link or go in this link, you will find RSS feed for that. You can create a Teams channel with an RSS app attaching to that channel. So anytime there is a new blog announcement happening, it will be dumped into your Teams channel and you'll be able to see what announcement was happened that time. So this is a quick bite on what is happening with Azure. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening in.